hear us, right? Yep. And I'll call us to order at 5:07. Michael, do you have any modifications or additions to the agenda?
President Everett, there are two. One is to move the Hood River Distillers Addendum number 1 to action. And the other is to move consent item I regarding the utilities, move that also to an action item.
Okay. All right, and Genevieve, do we have any public comment?
Yes, there was public comment received from Chris Roebuck that I emailed earlier today. Michael, is she there? She said she was going to come and speak.
Yes, Chris is here and she would like to speak. So I'm going to turn the screen around so you should be able to see Chris, but just make any adjustments that you want.
See the top half anyway.
Hello, Chris.
Hello.
That work okay?
Am I supposed to? I can see myself. I think I'm that shadowy figure, right?
You are the shadowy figure, yeah.
You're good.
The mystery person.
A little bit closer to get the lights better if you can.
No, that's all right. That's okay. Nobody needs to see more eye candy.
I can hear you clearly.
Good, thank you. So I just wanted to elaborate a bit. I've urged you in the written testimony to shelve expansion proposals until board actions that would avoid a return to the airport noise levels of 2019 are developed and implemented. Fly friendly did not prevent the escalation of noise to the levels that it was in 2019, and we know that it can't in the future. Only board decisions can do that. But there hasn't been discussion of a broader vision for the airport. The strategic plan is on hold. There hasn't been discussion of the survey results. And the joint work group, which, thank you, you have set up between ACC pilots and residents, has only had one meeting. So on behalf of 168 people who said that airport noise is damaging their homes and their neighborhoods, I would just ask that you not do any airport expansion until you have a chance to understand what the port can do and to implement those things. In particular, the hangars that are on your agenda for today. When I looked at the results for just the residents of Hood River, more people disagreed than agreed that they should be built. And in fact, as far as airport expansion in general, the margin was about 2 to 1 of people who disagreed that the airport should be expanded beyond its current use. There's cynicism out there that the only reason that the port is building hangars is because the port makes money off of hangars, and that's just not healthy. So I'm again just here on behalf of those 168 people and hope that you will wait until you can hear recommendations about what the port can do to mitigate noise. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Is there anyone else that would like to speak from the public?
There's no one else here in the commission room.
All right, and I'll move on to the consent agenda and minus item H and I, which are being moved to the action items. Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll motion to approve the consent agenda.
From off mute, I will second.
All right, been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Chair's aye, it passes. Yeah, so presentation and discussion, preliminary design review of commercial airport hangars. Ann?
Yep. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so you have in your packet a memo summarizing staff efforts regarding board direction to look into potential flex hangars at the airport. So if you remember, this is one of the development options that was identified in 2017 as part of the real estate analysis that staff completed. So as part of this hangar design, you'll note that the concept design is very flexible. So the idea here was that the port, as an industrial business promoter, is looking for ways to potentially develop space to support our local area industries. One of those industries is aviation related, having to do with the UAV industry and also some other aviation related type businesses. So these hangars are really designed to be flexible so that they can support both R&D type companies that are industrial companies that are aviation related. They have to be aviation related to be able to locate at the airport. The airport provides industrial space to support those businesses. As most of you know, industrial space is extremely limited in the valley, so this gives us an opportunity to support those businesses. The airplanes are shown in the hangars because, of course, these hangars are built on the airport and need to be flexible for the future, for the lifespan of those buildings, to potentially store airplanes. We currently have a wait list for T hangars at the airport of about 30. These are already airplanes that are tying down on the ramp or that are at Hood River, they just don't have hover. So this hangar design would provide either space for hangar space or space for R&D industrial type space if the business, of course. So Aaron Fagery and Associates is a very well-known architect designer who works with a lot of airports. And has built some things recently. So he had a very straightforward plan that hits both targets, again, of R&D and hangar space. And he also had some recent cost estimates. So in your packet, you have a cost estimate and you have the designs. What you also have is a cash flow analysis that I completed that just sort of shows you potentially what a potential return would be for an R&D type space. So there's some assumptions there of a loan and a term and a lease rate, and then some TI dollars, which we wouldn't need very much of. So the board asked me to get this proposal together and come back to you and have a discussion about whether or not you would like to go to the next step, which is then putting together marketing materials, going out to the market to see what kind of interest there is in the port building this type of building, and to see if there is any interest in pre-leasing. And then the idea would be to come back to the board if there is any interest and work towards executing some leases and moving forward with development of a building. So there are a number of steps that the board can take from this point. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions or.
I have one question, Anne, on the two designs. It just looks like one of them's the hangars are a little bit bigger than the other ones. What would the pros and cons be of going bigger or keeping it smaller? If like for airport usage, like for an airplane, would it be easier to rent out the hangars if they're smaller for single tenants, or would it be better to have them be bigger and maybe 2 people could rent the hangar together and store multiple airplanes in them. And then also for tenant use for R&D, does this architect person who works with a lot of airports have a comment, or you have a comment on, would bigger spaces suit R&D people better, or would the smaller spaces be easier to rent?
So most of the R&D type folks who are looking for space are, you know, around either of these sizes. The size difference isn't a ton. This size is about what they're looking for, somewhere around this square footage for R&D tenants. If they're smaller than this, they're typically able to find, you know, something in a building like Big 7 or something else. But most of the time they have equipment, you know, CNC routers, or, you know, big equipment that needs to be wheeled in on the ground level. And a lot of times they're willing to pay for a little extra space to have the convenience of, and the space to be able to maneuver their equipment around. So I would say in this case, you know, for that use, bigger is a little bit better. And you can also demise these down. Maybe a tenant needs, you know, 2 of those bays or just the 1. As far as hangar storage, so there are fewer people, you're right, that own 4 airplanes. They would need to stuff 4 airplanes in here. There could be some partnership opportunities, but likely if they're going to be storing small aircraft, that you could fit multiple of them in a hangar like this, they would be looking at something like a box hangar, which the board will get a proposal on later this fall. So, you know, 4 planes is a lot of planes to put in there, but it does give people more flexibility. As far as the larger aircraft, we have had some interest from folks that own larger aircraft where you would only put 1 in the hangar. So as far as market need, right now there is need for hangar space of any kind because we just don't have it. And so people would get creative. Like I said, it would maybe be partnerships where there's 4 airplanes in a hangar. And so in that case, bigger would be better. Does that answer your question?
Perfectly, thank you.
Okay.
And you said you had a waiting list of 30, is that what I heard?
It's about 30. I don't think that's the exact number. Daryl may have a better, an exact number.
I don't care about the exact number. You have a waiting list. I'm curious if you know, I don't want to know names, but I'm curious about the composition of the waiting list. Is it a recreational waiting list, or is it a business related waiting list? And I ask that because development at the airport that in some way supports local businesses or supports the expansion of local businesses is much more interesting than, or I think much more of a benefit to the community, I should say, than just expanding hangars for the heck of it for anybody that wants to put a plane there. So what's the waiting list?
So I can get back to you on the exact composition of business versus recreation. I can't tell you that off the top of my head. Daryl may be able to tell you that off the top of your head. As far as business expansion though, the idea for this was for businesses. The idea for this hangar currently was to support local industrial businesses that were aviation related that needed space, and potentially some hangar space for storage. The rates are going to be high enough that, you know, people who are just paying for storage of an airplane, it's going to be expensive for them.
Right, and in that, I think it could be a great thing in conjunction with perhaps buildings out there that also house these businesses that are growing. And I keep going back to something Commissioner Short used to say about partnering with high school. These are the kinds of developments that I could really see not only needing hangars, but needing buildings and work really well out there. If we're just building garages, I don't know that the money is there, but I don't know if that's the kind of development we want either. So I'm curious about the composition the tenants there.
Right. And Commissioner Shepherd, if I may, this is Daryl. The wait list right now is probably mostly recreational people, but the reason for that, I would say, is that that's what we have to offer to them. So I think that if people thought there was a tea hanger that they could run their business out of, the wait list would shift.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but these spaces are about 7,500 square feet.
Let's see, about, yeah, I think 6,500 to, about 7,500.
Okay, and then you're proposing in your cash flow analysis, 85 cents a foot.
Yeah, as
So that's like $6,000 a month in rent. So that's a pretty expensive garage, and I fully agree with Ben that if, to the extent we can steer this, what, the federal and state money we have coming to the airport towards economic development and high school aviation programs, and have it be much more of an incubator type space rather than a garage.
Or at least think like, if we're going to build this, then is it possible to build an office right next to it so that these companies that might need to relocate or expand and aren't necessarily flying all day long, but have something to do with the industry that might need a plane or might need somewhere to park or might need somewhere to test and develop, can access this as well. I'd like to, you know, if other commissioners agree, think about it along those lines more than just a garage.
I couldn't agree more.
Can I clarify something, Commissioner Shepherd, on that? So what you're saying is, you said put office next to these? Because we're considering, you know, having these be R&D spaces, so there would, you know, potentially be office spaces within these buildings.
That becomes much more interesting to me if these companies can, or any company has the option of relocating their staff if they're in the proper industry and they need a space like this that is a mix of not only office, development space, hangar. That is much more interesting to me than a garage for somebody in their plane.
Yep, and that's exactly what Mr. Fagree designed these for. So you'll see that there's mezzanine space, which could be office, as well as he's worked with some hangars that have converted a significant amount of the floor space into R&D use. So like I said, office sort of cubicle space with equipment that they're testing things on.
I just think it could be an incubator for a completely different industry or an expansion of an industry we've already worked with. Yeah, that's interesting.
The limiting factor with business is that per the county code, it does have to be 50% of their business does have to be in some portion of the aviation industry. So it has to be related.
I don't think we want them there unless the majority of their business is in the aviation industry. I don't know why we want them there.
Right.
Well, they don't necessarily have to fly, do they, Ann?
No, they just have to be within the industry. So you have with UAVs, many of those companies, support companies, people making all the different components of that, don't have any need to fly, but are making components for the aviation industry. So it doesn't necessarily have to mean airplanes. There can be paint booths to paint airplanes. There's, you know, fixing motors and engines, you know, all the components that go into UAV building and other offshoot industries that don't require flying.
Yeah. And
Well, I can easily say that I'm for it. I'm for it for the R&D type companies. And I think that the cost to construct, adding the small amount of square footage to make them on the larger side would probably make a lot of sense to go that route. So I'm saying that I'm for going the next step.
Okay.
I would agree with that as well. But, you know, in the past, we have said that this wouldn't be a project the port would finance. Rather, we would try and entice private interest. Once we have the dirt, you know, shovel ready, we'd try and get somebody else to stick a shovel in it.
I think we had shifted somewhat that this was a potential development option for the port to develop. And so that's, I was gonna go towards, go to the market to assess whether or not there was interest in pre-leasing. That was my understanding of the direction for this specific building. However, there are additional building pads that in the future, potentially the port had talked about pursuing a private developer for that.
Well, that's a good question for you, John. I think I saw a cap rate on that. It was an 8, I think is what I saw. If we can get some pre-leases and then you get an 8 on it, how do you feel about that? You have plenty of experience there.
You know, I think that's attractive from the, you know, from a money perspective. We still have your point. We want to be discerning about what uses go in there. We don't have a lot of light industrial land.
No, I agree.
An 8 cap, sure, that's fine, especially if we get discerning uses.
So what I'm hearing is a yes to putting together marketing information to go out and see what kind of interest there is, and then bring that back to the board to assess if that's the type of interest you want, and if you want to move to the next step.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's what I'm hearing as well.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
We'll get a profile of the people that are interested at the same time, right?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you, Ann, that was good. And Fred, next up is the financial report for 11 months.
Sorry about that. So yeah, as you can tell, bridge traffic continues to, you know, be below last year's numbers. The good news is it's coming back, and I have a later graph after this that sort of depicts that it's getting closer and closer to prior year numbers. That said, you know, revenues are down likewise. It's not anything new since we basically had no tolls for the whole month of April. But, you know, with that, you know, we're sitting here at the end of May and we're about $272,000 down year to date. That's not too bad. So as we compare it against previous years, so I feel good about that. With regard to the budget, there's nothing really to talk about with regard to, you know, personal services and materials and services. I did put in the budget transfer to those specific asset categories like the Halyard building, and and that's self-explanatory. A lot of these asset centers were just running, had higher utility costs than what was budgeted. So there's nothing new there. With regard to capital outlay, our CIP projects historically have, you know, run a little bit behind, and then come April, we start to really generate. We get our permits in hand. We're getting ready to, you know, turn some dirt, do some construction. And with the COVID-19, that sort of deferred a little action, and we deferred a few projects here into this year for until 2020-21. So that's where you see capital outlay being a little bit below budget. And, you know, that's just the way it is for now. And we're keeping track of that as we move along. Our lease revenues are, you know, what they are. We are a little bit down, but for all intents and purposes, we're not bad. We're actually doing very well with regard to revenues. for a lot of our buildings. There are some tenants that ask for deferment and some have actually asked for waivers and we've given them. And where we sit today, we're not in bad shape. We're maybe not tracking exactly to our budget, but it's not a significant impact. So I feel good about that. The parking in the waterfront, we knew that was going to come in below budget just because we used a schedule that was where we thought we would have full build out with our parking, and that didn't happen. And also with this COVID-19 and starting late for a summer season, that's showing its impact as well. So, we'll be down with regard to waterfront parking and recreation, just due to the nature of this year. It is what it is, and we're not really going to get around that. But I don't think it's as significant as we initially had thought. Marine and airport revenues are tracking right to budget. So a lot of this billing went out before the COVID hit, and so they're fine. So that's all I had. You can go to the consolidated component, and there's the next statement. If you turn that a little bit, yeah, it looks fine. Our bottom numbers are not as bad in a lot of ways as compared to other entities. So I feel pretty good about that. So if you have any questions on the operating, I can talk a little bit about receivables would be the next piece. I know Commissioner Strike wanted us to sort of come back with that. In your memo, I sort of outlined some of those that are sort of hitting the 31 to 60 day aging. It just so happens by the time I sent this out to you and today, many of these have been paid up. So, Benton, Stern, Jeremy Young, electronic assemblers, they historically have always been behind, but they've always seemed to catch up as well. But we are talking to them. What's on the agenda later is Sonic Aerospace, and there's a little bit amount with YE's Labs that was in dispute, and we're still talking to them about that. So it doesn't look as bad, especially as I sit today with a lot of these having caught up. So I'm open for any comments that you may have.
I just think it's encouraging, Fred, that we're not taking as big a hit as we feared we would.
Yeah. Oh, Genevieve, do you have that one? There, take a look at this. So this, I know it's really volatile, right? If you can back out a little way. So yeah. So it is volatile, but what you can see is this, it's closing. The blue line is last year and the orange line is this year, and we're closing. This is bridge traffic. As you can see, we're pretty wide, and then we're slowly getting to the variance between last year and this year on bridge traffic is coming together. So, what I see during the weekday, we're about 10%, anywhere from 1% to 10% below last year. Sunday continues to be about 30% off last year. Saturdays continue to be about 20 to 22% off from last year. The weekends are what they are, but the weekdays we're starting to see this action that you're visually seeing. So, anyways,
that's interesting. I mean, that would imply that we are being successful in keeping influx of travelers.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, I think we're going to, I don't know if we're going to beat out last year. Last year was a pretty good year. But as long as we can get close, keep it within, I want to see this graph get close to within 5%, then I think we're going to be fine going forward then. Yeah. And that's all I had.
Okay.
Fred, and this might even be a better question for Anne, because I know she's been participating in a lot of those weekly meetings, but is there any indication from the state that we're gonna go, I mean, I know we're putting a pause on a lot of things. Has anyone heard any indications or anything about going back to a full hard press stop again, or
I know
Or not.
Michael is in those meetings with the county and state. Michael, you may want to talk about that.
Recent governor's order, which starts tomorrow, is really about face coverings. The way I interpret it to mean this is a pretty significant directive, and we'll have to see how it goes. But there's a flare up in COVID positive cases around the state, and Hood River County is no different. So this directive will it'll be determined if it's effective or not. But if the cases continue to rise like they have, I think stepping back or going back is clearly something the state is going to consider from my point of view.
thank you.
Okay, any more questions for Fred? In that case, Ann, we're back to you with the Airport Advisory Committee. I'm sorry I missed the last meeting.
Okay, so that's okay. There's a lot going on here. So I'm just going to go ahead and start for you and start the discussion. So as you know, we went out for 2 AAC seats that are coming available. Those are being vacated by James Stewart, and then John Benton holds one, and he's applying to sit in that seat again. So there are 3 applicants, and the question that came up, we stated that aviation experience was preferred. Not that preference has been questioned, and as we move through this ongoing process of fly friendly and noise impacts of the airport on the community, concern has been raised that maybe the aviation experience preference should be removed, and that the AAC committee should promote and actively look for members that don't have aviation experience and that are general public. That is really the first question that are looking to fill 2 seats. The question is, should we re-advertise? Well, actually, the first question is, does the board want to have folks on the AAC with aviation experience preferred, or would you rather take that out of the advertisement? And then if you do want seats that are not aviation preferred, do you want to specify the amount of seats to be filled by the general public?
So Commissioner Everett, could I jump in for a moment?
Sure.
The Airport Advisory Committee has been staffed over the years since I've been here by several people. It's a standing committee of the commission, which means it's listed in our governance manual. But the governance manual doesn't have a clear definition or a detailed description of the committee or its work. So which is something I think we should probably consider adding further clarity, not only on potentially the mix of memberships, but also more specifically on what the commission or the committee's charge is, what the commission wants to state their charge is. And that's something that I think staff can bring back as a proposal and for the commission to consider. But if you look back over the years that I've been here and the different folks that have staffed it, including myself, I was staffed it for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. The idea was always that you wanted a group of people that were interested in the airfield. They were interested in the airport, but there was never, in my experience anyway, a stipulation that they had to be a pilot, that they had to be related specifically to aviation. So over the years, we've had people that have lived next to the airport. We've had people that are retired pilots, people that are interested in aviation, maybe represented a sort of educational tranche of interested in how skill sets or knowledge could be increased with students at the high school and that sort of thing. And so I think from my standpoint, I think it is important that you always want a committee that brings a range of experiences and a range of perspectives, because that's going to provide you with the best information to make decisions about. So if you circle back to what we had 2 openings, we advertised, and in the advertisement, there was this pilot or this aviation experience preferred note. It was a pretty short notice, but that was included in it. So we've had some feedback from 2 people in particular, but perhaps reflective of others that, hey, we would have liked to, or we would want to see what the pool of interested people would be if that aviation preference wasn't there. Of the applicants, there was one that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ann, but certainly there's one that's a resident near the airfield, but not a pilot and not with specific aviation experience. And she expressed interest, and you see her application in your packet as well as others. And I believe, I wasn't at the meeting, but I understand that the AAC, during that particular meeting, they asked the applicants to leave the room and then discuss the application pool, and then came up with their recommendations to you, which were 2 people from the pool that happened to be pilots. And so I think that the question that Anna is posing is an important one, is that would you like to re-advertise, see if there's other interested parties, and bring those back so that you have potentially a wider applicant pool? And then connected to that is, what's your take on whether you want the committee to be structured in a certain way, or whether you, with a certain characteristics, or would you rather it be broader than that? And I'll end by saying I do recommend that staff bring back to the commission a fuller description, recommended description of the advisory committee and what their charge is, so it's clear to people that are on it. And I guess the last thing I'll tell you is we have to make sure always that this is a committee of the commission. The members of the Airport Advisory Committee are public officials by the legal definition, and the meetings and the comport of the people on it need to be consistent with public meeting law and their role as public officials. So we just have to make sure that that is happening, and we have to take that to heart and do it well.
Michael, I have one question. How many people are on the committee? Is it a set number? Or is it discretionary?
It's defined in the governance manual, and it's 10. And if my memory serves me, it's 7 public members, 2 commissioners, and the FBO. Each are standing named committee members per our governance manual. The committee, as I understand it, recently decided to name 2, what were they?
Ex officio?
No, they weren't. They were, huh? Yeah, so apparently they named 2 ad hoc members, one of whom was the FBO, which should be already on the committee. And they also named the Glider Club as ad hoc. And so ad hoc, I don't think is a relevant term here. And if they meant to say ex officio, the definition.
So I will clarify that, Michael. Michael?
Yeah, Han, go ahead.
Yeah, I think.
Michael, I would like to step in there, please. So TAC Arrow has been ex officio. The AAC did not name them as ex officio again. I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Hello?
You're cutting in and out.
Can you hear me? Okay. So TAC Arrow has been ex officio per the governance. The Glider Club, there was discussion about requesting them to be ex officio. In tonight's memo, the request is there for WHAM to become an ex officio member. Did you guys hear that?
I think that I heard it a little choppy. I wonder if you cut your video off, if your audio would come in clear
Is that better?
so far. Yeah, keep talking.
Okay. Okay, great. So yes, governance, and then the request tonight is whether or not the AAC, whether or not WHAM should also be designated as ex officio because of planes that utilize the airport. So the idea there is that if they became ex officio, they would have a seat at the table always in the future just because of their impact on the airport. Nobody deemed that the Glider Club was an ex officio member. There was discussion about that option as an option or a possibility to be brought to the board.
So I think this is all the more reason that we come back to you with a proposal for this structure of the committee so you can consider it. TAC Arrow should.
Do you want to hear our opinions on that first, or do you want to just come back to us with a proposal?
Oh, I think, yeah, getting some sense of what you think would be much appreciated.
Well, personally, I don't mind the huge users like WHAM and TAC Arrow out there being ex officios. I do think this committee should have a bit more broad base. I do think that I don't know that a seat needs to be reserved, quote unquote, for a non-airport user. I think that simply opening the possibility, since we get to approve any recommendation, I think opening that as a possibility makes sense. I do think members of the community that perhaps are not airport users themselves would have a valuable voice at the table, and we can decide how many that is and what that looks like. But I don't know why we wouldn't allow that. I don't know why having more input would be a bad thing. I guess I think that's true for any committee as far as the port's concerned, but that's my 2 cents.
Ben, I'm gonna piggyback off that. I agree. I wonder if I agree that WHAM and TAC Arrow should probably have a voice because they are a large user. And I agree that more members of the public should feel that they can apply for it. I'm wondering if it's truly a 7-member committee. I mean, do you feel, Michael, and would it be good to say, I also don't want it to turn into a committee where nobody has aviation experience or whatever. And so Is there a way that we can do a balance of saying we just always want to make sure that certain, maybe 4 seats are aviation related, or I'm not exactly sure how to word that to ensure that we do keep that balance and it doesn't get top heavy on either side.
Well, I'd say let us come back with a proposal, but as Ben said, whenever you approve a new member, fill a position in the Airport Advisory Committee, each commission can make that determination. I'm reluctant to say there's a certain number of slots, and I'm also reluctant to say there's, it's clearly that we have only pilot, we only want aviation experience. That's a determination that can be made each time there's a vacancy. But I think, for example, these changes we're talking about really do change our governance manual. So we need to propose something to the commission. You need to approve it, and we need to approve it within the context of the governance manual. The TAC Aero should not be named, for example, as the representative unless it's TAC Aero as the FBO. You want your fixed base operator to be at the table, in the room, and providing their experience to the advisory committee during any discussions. To add WHAM, that would be a good idea, but we do have to change the governance manual to do that. I don't think you can allow the AAC to make that determination. And I guess I'd defer to Jerry if it's better to just reconstitute the description of the Airport Advisory Committee, bring it back to the commission, or whether the commission could decide tonight, for example, to say, let's add a position for WHAM. But I wouldn't call them ex officio. I would just say we're adding another member, standing member of the committee. So Jerry,
Michael, I would agree with both Ben and Christy. I think that the advertising for airport experience is prejudicial, and we don't want to create an echo chamber in our advisory committee. But how to do that is sticky, and I'd say we do want broad input, or I think my vote would be that we want a broad input from both users, interested people, and citizens. But maybe come back with a proposal of how to do that.
yeah. First question would be, do you want us to re-advertise for positions on the AAC, the current 2 openings, and take out the aviation experience preferred? And the second is, I'm hearing pretty clearly, yes, we want to consider modifications to and better description of the Airport Advisory Committee.
My preference would be yes to re-advertise, remove the stipulation, and let us take a look at who applies. Like you said and confirmed, we can agree to whomever and approve what we choose. But I do think removing that and opening that up is the right thing to do.
I agree with Ben, because some people might not have applied that were interested, but because they didn't have the aviation component, decided not to. So I think it would be good. I'm just wondering though, because I know that later on in our packet, we're talking about deferring next month's 2 meetings and consolidating them into 1. So I'm just wondering if there's a way that we can do this in a timely fashion in order to get people on that committee, or does it matter if it's a whole month from now?
I'll chime in and just let you know that we can place the ad in all Gorge area newspapers tomorrow, but it won't run until the following Wednesday. So you want to time your application deadline that way.
We also our next our next airport advisory committee meeting is this Thursday.
I lost Ann off my screen. Does anybody still have her?
I don't.
Or I just say that I concur with both Ben and Christie that we should re-advertise it.
Okay, we will do that. And Jerry, I tried to lead you into a question. Are you still there?
I am.
If the commission, there's this recommendation to add Wham as a standing member of the committee. Presumably that changes our governance manual, which means we need to we need to propose that and have the commission approve that.
No, I think that rather than this authority to appoint ex officio members or expand the membership of the committee isn't something that the committee itself has. It's vested in the commission. And I think based on this discussion, there should be some revisions to the policy that talks about this committee and what the components are and what their charge is, and bring that recommendation back to the commission.
Excellent. So the commissioners would like us to do that?
I heard yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I wish Ann was on, but I would say I don't think whether we go to one meeting or two in August, I don't think it hurts the committee if there's a few week delay in filling those positions.
Okay, then thank you. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, anybody want any more discussion on this topic or should we move on?
I think from my standpoint, I think that covers it. We have clear direction.
All right, then
Well,
moving on.
I sorry, Ann did pose one other question about whether it goes back to the question of how do we constitute the AAC, but it's been oftentimes difficult to get two commissioners to attend the AAC meetings. And I think she posed the question, does the commission still feel like they want two on that committee or one? Would one suffice?
Well, I know that everyone loves meetings, and that's why we do this, so we can attend as many meetings as possible. I think, ideally 2 heads are better than 1. You get some different input and people bring different information back to the table. But I think because Ann is attending the meeting, that I think having 1 commissioner would be sufficient as far as making sure that the communication gets back to the commission as a whole. So I'd be fine with 1.
Or perhaps a commissioner and then an alternate in case that commissioner wasn't available.
I'm back.
Oh, welcome back. Yeah.
Kind of like how we do on the bridge, joint bridge committee. I think that would be perfect, just to have a main and an alternate.
Yeah, that seems to work pretty well in the bridge committee, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It's
Yeah.
nice.
Yep.
Okay. I think that's all from Ann's memo.
Okay. Then Ann, you fell out at the end. Are there points you wanted to make on this subject before we move on? I'm not getting that.
No, just one. I was approached by the executive session. I had never, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
But not now.
I had not, I was not prepared for that question.
That's fine. The resolution was that it's going to go back to staff and staff will come with a recommendation. So you'll have plenty of time for whatever input you want there. I'm sorry if you're trying to talk and I just can't hear you. I'm going to move on to bridge replacement update. Michael?
Great, thank you, John, appreciate it. Just a couple of items that weren't included in the packet or the critical path update was included, and just kind of wanted to bring your attention to the intensive level survey on the archaeological report that we did submit a plan for surveying the site over in White Salmon. And we're getting a lot of comments back from tribes in the state historic preservation offices in Oregon and Washington, basically asking us to go back to the drawing board. There's a lot of concern about disturbing resources at that site. And it's a little bit confounding because the site that's in question is actually not the preferred alternative. It's one of the other alternatives that is being studied, that after you do the study and then you realize, oh, okay, the preferred alternative is actually the one we want to follow through on. But the ODOT, the ODOT individual that's running the Section 106 work really is interested in seeing this this area studied. So there's going to be some additional effort to make sure that the plan is respects all the resources that are anticipating being found on that site. But it's something that we just need to keep an eye on. As we go through the cost to complete analysis, this expanded role is actually being incorporated into that. And so that should be adequately addressed there, at least from a budgetary perspective. If one of the questions that I have for the team is if they're going through that intensive level survey, and let's say something else is found, what happens then? And really, the position that I have been pushing forward is that any additional, if we will call it level 3 survey, would be pushed off and included in a memo of agreement amongst the parties, that any additional work would be pursued as we get permits and financing for construction, so that we can acknowledge what may be there, but that we don't end up spending a lot of resources getting the NEPA process complete on a singular detail that could certainly be developed or researched at a later date. So I think that's just something that that we'll want to address when we bring the cost to complete analysis to you. And one thing I was thinking might be helpful is maybe for me to give you a few questions that you can ask WSP and OTAC, some questions about the cost to complete in areas where maybe you'd have some interest in having the consultants dive a little bit deeper. And so I think this archaeological area is definitely one where my plan is to give you some questions that if you're interested, then you can ask those and kind of open up a discussion with the WSP and OTAC.
Kevin, was tribal concern to not disturb the site?
That was the Umatilla. The Umatilla's concern was don't test there. And so not all of the tribes had it so blatantly stated. I believe the Yakima and the Warm Springs wanted additional survey work, but didn't like our consultants' plan for how they were going to be disturbing the soils, et cetera, et cetera. So so really, it's the Umatilla so far that has been pretty clear that they don't want any disturbance there. But at this point, they're an outlier. If for some reason we get the Yakima response, we haven't heard from the Yakima yet. If they have a similar response, then, hopefully ODOT would, reconsider that. But it's just something to be aware of. Moving along onto the second page, the Bi-State Working Group did not meet or will not be meeting on Thursday. Steve is still unavailable. So I reached out to all the members of the group, of the working group, and just brought that to their attention. So I'll be getting back with the committee once Steve is back up and running.
Kevin, I'm sorry to interrupt on that. I just have a question. Do you think, because it seems like a lot has happened, that it might be good to maybe at least have a short meeting, since everyone kind of already has it in their schedule, just to update, especially the Washington side of what's going on, so that they're very up to date on everything that's happening? I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, I guess the question was, or the thought is, if, I don't think Steve will need more than a week to bounce back. So my hope is that maybe the following Thursday, we can get the working group together. And usually during those working group meetings, that's where I give a little NEPA update as well. So trying to be sensitive to the working group member, their time. So I anticipate that we won't be meeting Thursday, but maybe the following week, and I can give an update then.
Okay, I didn't know it was that soon. So yeah, fine. Thank you.
And I talked to a lot of the members of the working group. Commissioner Everett and I chatted yesterday, I think for 5-10 minutes about some of these things. So I do have a lot of one-on-one, one-off conversations about the topics as well.
Just one quick note, Kevin.
Yeah.
Senator Merkley will be having a town hall that, until the cancellation, conflicted with that meeting. So John and Christy and Kevin, if you would like to attend Senator Merkley's town hall, I can send you the invitation from his staffer, Dan Marr.
That's great. I was able to replace that. The other reason that we can't have the meeting is after it was canceled, Chuck Green and I are meeting from OTAC to review the cost to complete at that same period on Thursday. So, but I am planning on dialing in for the Merkley Town Hall, perhaps at the end.
Yeah, Genevieve, I'd like that info. Thank you.
The other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention, if on page 103, if you could bring that up, Jen, that's the bridge replacement project budget. And just wanted to review some of the elements here. So the one thing that I did want to bring to your attention is that we've got the WSP contract, which is in line 44. And we do have currently a task 9, which is line 53. We've got the contract contingency. I think most of that, as I reported a month ago, will be used for the balance of the contract. But if you go down to the very bottom of that sheet to line 99,
Sorry.
Yeah, there you go. The final contingency, the contingency with ODOT. After we completed the projections for fiscal year 2019-20, which was the end of June, I think that we're going to be, almost 350,000 available in contingencies to get the project done. So, that's one of the reasons why I did ask WSP to analyze the borings, the geotechnical borings. So that might be an area where we could dip into the contingencies, or we could put it into, some of the other phase 2 governance issues. I do think that at least for the next fiscal year, I think we do have adequate funding for the non-NEPA related activities. And I just wanted to show those to you on this budget, just so you can kind of have a sense. of how much money we're actually budgeting for post-NEPA activities. Going back up to line 57, you'll notice we've got Siegel's governance evaluation. So we've got 110,000 budgeted for his work. In that NEPA advising, the 27,000, there's about 11,000 of that 27,000 is actually if and when we're ready to go out for an RFP for engineering services. That is part of that 27,000. Continuing to go down, the preliminary cost estimate, for some reason we have additional engineering needs. We've got $10,000 there. It's identified as Mott McDonald, but that's doesn't have to be Mott. It could be OTAC or it could be additional WSP work. Going down to line 65 or 66, you've got the stand 50,000 for traffic tolling studies, and right below that, the project delivery analysis, which is the doing a P3 versus traditional analysis. So we've got about almost $200,000 budgeted here, not touching the contingencies for post NEPA activities. And up to this point, we have been primarily using that bi-state working group as the committee to really work through those issues as they come up. I just really want to keep the balance of the commission. I realize that we don't have a full commission tonight, but just that, the work that Steve is doing on the bi-state compact and developing a memo of understanding amongst the 6 agencies and developing that work plan is going to include these items in the next year's budget. So, so you have about, and ODOT has agreed to all of those non-NEPA related tasks. So, I feel pretty comfortable for the next year that there's plenty of budget for that bi-state working group to keep active and to make progress. All of our subsequent grant applications, like the build and any of the lobbying that we're doing in Olympia, those also have administrative line items as well, so that somebody can be there keeping the bi-state working group together and working through the issues that they've identified need to be done. So just kind of wanted to run you through that budget, see if you have any questions or comments.
This is excellent, Kevin. It's just coming to the point of completion where this is really useful to get down to amounts of money we can understand and kind of know what kind of constraints or opportunities they present.
And I've got more detailed versions of these line items, which I can share with you in the future. But this is a pretty high level summary of what we have to look forward to in the next year. So I think with that, if there's any other questions on my report, that's all I've got for you tonight.
Okay, questions for Kevin?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. Michael, the director's report.
Thank you. We have a delay to the July meeting, so you got a longer report from me. I'll just hit the highlights though. So I'm a little torn about this, but we could have one meeting in August, and everybody on staff thinks that probably would work from the standpoint of deadlines and things, or we could go to 2 and sort of stick with the regular schedule. So at this point, we're recommending just one on the 11th, but we could go to the 4th and 18th if the commission wants to. So I guess I'm looking for 3 commissioners to nod their head or Give me a preference if you're available on the 11th or not.
I'm around a lot.
Yep, one
I'm here.
meeting's fine with me on the 11th.
Yeah, I can do it too.
Excellent. So now we have to force Commissioners Merriweather and Strike to not take any vacations then.
It's called voluntold.
So my executive director review, annual review will not occur tonight. We had 3 respondents, but we have 2 that were not able to. So we're not ready for that. That'll be postponed to the 11th.
I'm one of them. It's my fault. It didn't send. My fault.
No, you got yours in.
Oh, well, it's all ones anyway, so yeah.
Did I send mine in?
Sorry. I just wanted to apologize to Jerry for being so late. I thought I sent it and it didn't go through, so my fault.
No worries.
Am I okay? Did I get everything in?
I'd have to defer to council on that.
I haven't seen yours, Christy.
Oh, I'm busted. Can you resend it to me? Because I'm inundated with emails and it probably just got lost in the shuffle and I can do it tonight.
And
Sure.
if I remember correctly, 5, closer to 5 is a little bit better score. Just to remember. So I listed a whole bunch of issues and items related to COVID, and of course, some of this is old news now. The governor on the 13th issued an order that on the 15th, gatherings indoor will go to 10, and outdoor, you have to maintain 6 foot or you have to wear a face mask. So there's a big push on face coverings now. And I'll talk about this in a minute, but that has led us to really rethink the event site. In fact, I'll do it right now. The event site, especially last weekend, really had a lot of people there, and a lot of people that were not social distancing. Lot 1 was open. I didn't personally see it, but apparently there were some times when a big chunk of it, a third or so, was full of cars. So between the full-on event site and all the campers and things and lot 1 being open, it just meant that a ton of people were there, and we had several people express concern about that. So given the governor's orders and given that experience last weekend, we've talked at length at staff, and what we are preparing to do is implement some changes to reduce at least try to reduce somewhat the number of people at the event site. And what that means is no parking on lot 1. And it means that we'll cone off the south curb line in the event site where there's frequently a lot of campers and motorhomes and such set up in the shade. And then third, we'll have it open open in the morning. And then when it reaches capacity, we will close it, put up barricades, chain it off, and put a sign up that says, this is closed due to COVID crowding. And then at intervals, it could be an hour, it could be longer, we would assess whether there's any additional capacity at the event site. And if there is, then we would a few times look to potentially open it up and let other cars in. But in that way, in those different steps, we would not only send a message that this is a serious issue and we got to take it seriously, and in doing so, reduce the capacity or the number of people that are at least parked there and gathering. So that step, we plan to implement this starting this Saturday and for the weekends in the future.
Michael, may I ask, and I apologize for interrupting, may I ask what communication we have had regarding this with the various user groups? And maybe this is a question for Daryl, but what communication have we had with them regarding this? Because it does not sound like they're doing what they said they would do, which gets me from being fully on their side to really not. So I want to know what communication we've had and what their response has been.
So Commissioner Shepherd, do you mean what have they done themselves to help limit the crowding, or what are they in support of our decision to do what we plan to do for this weekend, just so I'm answering you
They,
correctly.
they asked us, and I was there, they asked us to allow them some leeway to take care of it and to police themselves and to police those areas, which I am in full support of because I support them being there. But it doesn't sound from what Michael said like that's happening. So have we had communication with them, or do we just need to restrict access?
Yes, I have had communication with them, and they have all been very helpful with as far as, you know, the kiters and managing themselves at the event site proper. And same with the CGW too. They've been great as far as trying to, you know, send the message to spread their people out. What we're getting right now is a large amount of the beach goers. And so I worked the 4th of July weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, parking. And I was the parking gal. So I am intimate with what we have going on down there. And there are just so many people coming from out of town and then setting camp in there. So we don't really have necessarily the full, it's not just a kiter thing or a windsurfer or a foiler or a paddler. We have a lot of everybody. So they're trying to do the best they can. But then we have all of the people coming from out of town that want to set up the beach blankets and watch what's going on. So I feel like what I call the waterfront stakeholders have done the best they can. I sent out an email this afternoon, which I had sent to you. I don't know if you had a chance to read it yet, regarding our plan for the weekend. Yeah.
I didn't get it, Daryl. I'm sorry. I read my emails an hour ago. I didn't see it.
Oh, shoot, I'll resend it to you. But it, again,
Please.
bringing them into the circle and asking for their support. And I feel like they have been very supportive of the decisions that we've made. And we got a lot of positive feedback regarding how we manage the property on the 4th and, you know, people's willingness to comply. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. And my question is, have our local stakeholders done, in your opinion, all they can? That's if they have, then yeah. I want to support them.
I believe they have.
You know, I was down there on the 4th and I saw Daryl and, and I got a lot of really, really good feedback from people about the preference to allow the event site on the 4th to only be open to pass holders. I realized that allowing outsiders to come in and pay for a day use fee helps support financially. But maybe if we're getting some crowds and whatnot, and especially if the crowds are beachgoers, have you guys talked about the idea of maybe on the weekends it's pass holders only and those beachgoers have to pay the meters and walk in?
Commissioner Chapman, we did talk about a lot of different options today. And so what we thought we would try is this weekend. I'm also working this weekend. I'll be down there to help manage the lot. We will see how this weekend goes and then evaluate next week and see if we need to take it to a next level or change direction a little bit. So we've got a lot of different options out there right now and trying to do the best we can to still keep our businesses alive. So the businesses still need the out of town people to be able to come, and we don't want to send the wrong message that, you know, like the local windsurf companies really need those people right now. So it's really a slippery slope trying to manage it all, but we're going to try this approach this weekend and totally open to a new approach for the weekend after.
Right, but don't those local windsurf companies, I mean, aren't their reservations usually booked days in advance, and they could just communicate to people and say, you know, there's parking on the street, or maybe if they have a lesson or something that's like, I understand the concern is we've got large groups of people coming down and they're camping all day long and they're using the beach, and so I don't know how to separate the two to, number one, encourage pass holders to be able to utilize their passes, or encourage people who are patrons of the businesses down there, because I want to encourage that as well. So
Right.
I just don't know what the balance is on that.
Yeah, that's what we're working on. So,
We're gonna sort of be introducing a new concept for waterfront users, and that is that regardless of whether or not there's parking spots empty, the event site can be closed for COVID crowding capacity being full. And that's really what the signs will say when we trigger that closure. They'll say, do not enter, COVID crowding capacity is full. And so it's really sort of a different way of thinking. Just because you can get a car in there, we need to be able to make a judgment when the park itself is just too crowded, even if you could wedge another car in the parking lot. We've ordered 3 large signs that will be mounted to barricades that will be used for closures, primarily at the event site, but they'll be available for other closures if we get to a point where the crowds get ridiculous.
So the only worry that I have about that is, let's say, I have a kite lesson down there, or I'm going to go down there to kite or windsurf, and the lot's closed and it says due to COVID. Is that going to send a mixed message to people that they can't then walk in? And I understand what you're trying to do is to deter beachgoers, but what about the recreationalists?
if I may jump in, I have spoken with most of them, and they know to contact their lessons ahead of time. And if people have booked a kite lesson, it's well in advance. And so they will make arrangements for those people. So the event site specific people will be fine. What I was saying earlier is more of the message. If we're only allowing pass holders to park in the event site lot, is it sending the message, don't come to Hood River? It's just the big picture of it all. So, but those specific stakeholders at the event site have the heads up and are prepared to make arrangements for their customers.
And I don't know that the event side is the only problem. I agree that it is one, and spacing people out and figuring this is a toughie. You want to allow the local stakeholders. I agree with Commissioner Chapman that those supporting businesses, which a lot of them are stakeholders, obviously down there is important, while spacing people out. I also, as I was leading work today, maybe 200 teenagers down on the dock. It couldn't have been more packed. So there's a lot. It's a lot more than just the weekend. It's a lot more than just the event side.
It's the middle school.
Well, there may be 2 commissioners that can have an impact on those teenagers going down there.
It's not mine.
Yeah, I don't know about Christy, but I got 3 that won't listen to me. I can't do anything with 200 at all. I can try.
Well,
I just know that I heard from several people that over the 4th of July weekend, they really like the fact that they were a pass holder and they were actually able to get in. And one of the comments that one of them said to me is, I really hate, as a pass holder, and then I come and the event site lot is full, and it's full of people that paid to get in there, but I already paid for my pass and I can't even use it. So I just want to be very cognizant to that stakeholder group, that we make sure that their passes are being honored somehow, especially if we're not going to let people park in lot 1. So that's my big concern.
Yeah, let me just say that let's get through this weekend. There'll be people upset at us. There'll be people that are happy with us, but we can change the course here after this weekend, if that makes sense. I like the fact on 4th of July that only pass holders could get in, but there was a pretty extensive people power needed to make that happen, to monitor whether they have passes or not. So let's see how this goes. I mean, people, frankly, we all have to make sacrifices during this time, and this new order from the governor, I think, makes that point really clear. So after Sunday, we'll be able to evaluate how it went and determine if changes are needed.
And job well done on the 4th, by the way, Michael. Please, from me to staff, everybody, well done.
Yeah, thanks. I mentioned in my my report the big thanks to Daryl and to John. They were down here almost the entire day working at the event site and around, and that was a tremendous work. And I just thought it was interesting to point out, we've got one guy that hasn't had a 4th of July off in 22 years. Maybe it's 21. And he got to take the 4th of July off this year, even though there's no fireworks. So I had an extensive note here about the COVID impacts. Fred has already talked about the near year end for last fiscal year, looked at the traffic and revenue picture, and it looks like it's coming back. It might be a while, but it's in the right direction. And so because it's just the beginning of the fiscal year, but because we have decisions to make about not only step increases for staff that have performed well and also CPI increases, I would like to move forward with those step increases for staff that are eligible for them, and also for the CPI increase. And I say that in part because this really has been a tremendously difficult time. And as we talked about at a prior meeting, that staff has done pretty tremendous things during this time. And I think that we need to recognize that. At the same time, we have to be cognizant that we don't know the full picture, and we really won't have better information until we're probably near the end of the first quarter of this next fiscal year. But I've talked to Fred at length about it, and we believe that as we get into the fall and we get into the end of quarter 2, we will have a much better picture of where we are and what we can project ahead in terms of revenue. And at that point, we'll have plenty of time to make decisions about capital expenditures and also about potentially changes to staff levels. So I wanted to make that note. I'd like to move ahead on that basis, knowing that we're doing two things. We're recognizing staff, but we're also being cognizant of our responsibility to monitor effectively our revenue picture going forward. And related item is, as mentioned in the report, and you'll see it on the agenda, that I think for an item like the Big 7 roof, which is a significant amount of money, but also something we've worked on for several years and really needs to get done, that we feel comfortable, and this, I want to speak for Fred on this, that we feel comfortable recommending moving ahead with that capital expenditure because of the necessity of it, because of the need to get it done in good weather months, but also cognizant that we still would have time to make changes to balance out the fiscal year. Any questions about that from commissioners? None?
I'm in favor.
Yeah, I'm fine with it. It sounds like it's been a long project and needs to get taken care of.
I agree. Yeah, it's fine by me too.
Right, thank you. Just a few other points. American Cruise Lines, the letters in your packet, they were making an effort to lobby the governor's office, and what came back was a letter that said no, and it's indefinite. So I don't think we'll see ACL this year. A number of projects that our facilities crew keeps doing, and if you haven't been down to the event site and see how they opened up that avenue out to the sandbar, it's really quite amazing. It opened up a whole new area of beach that we never knew existed, that lived under blackberry bushes. And then the ramp or the dock project came together really well. It is the place to be if you're a teenager in Hood River on a hot day, and I think we can all imagine that if we were teenagers, we would probably be there too. Or I would, maybe not some of you. And then the great work that John did. We've had for 14 years. We had a problem with people jumping off the event site, the old cruise ship dock, and he finally said, "Let's just lay down some chain link fabric." And the police were thrilled, and it's solved the problem. And then there was a quick response by a bunch of people to a grass fire that occurred. Thank you, Commissioner Chapman. Was that your whole family that you threw into the mix to man the fire line?
Yeah, and some guests too. So they grabbed, I mean, it's Todd, right? Todd was super responsive. As soon as my daughter said, "I see a fire," he was running, and then he yelled at his staff to grab paddles, and he just started handing them out to people. So everyone in our group all grabbed paddles and just started trying to dig a fire line. And I mean, his concern and our concern was if it was climbing down the hill so quickly, it got to the road in a matter of seconds, and we were all just trying to get it to not jump the road over to Nichols Basin. So by the time the fire people showed up, it was pretty under control. So so good job. And port staff was on it in minutes, and so they were there, which they had a shovel and some rakes, and so they jumped in super quick. And between the port staff and Todd, they did a really good job.
Well, I keep waiting for the video to come out of that. All right, well, so mention of Freem and the work they're doing. I don't know the full picture, but I was on a meeting with ODOT in the city yesterday, and I think maybe one of you knows, but I think ODOT's frowning on the little pods that are set up on Oak Street. So there might be some announcements coming with that. Ann, I'm going to turn it to you well, Ann, are you there, by the way?
Yes.
Could you provide an update on the noise group, the first meeting of that group?
Yeah, sure. So we met on the 9th. This was a face-to-face meeting, socially distanced up at WHAM. So there are 3 neighbors and 3 AAC committee members, myself and Michael. So the idea behind this first meeting was to just have a baseline meeting and kind of frame what next steps were and sort of what the goals of the committee were. We didn't quite get there, but we did set the next meeting for August. And so we'll meet again in August and continue to meet until we can work through some of the current issues and come back to the commission with an AAC with any potential action items.
Great, thanks. The fracture critical inspection's done. That's every 2 years, and we hope that have a better report because we've spent significant money on some of the steel work. Fred, I'm going to suggest that you've probably already covered the traffic volumes with your prior report. Is there anything about all electronic tolling that you want to mention? Oh, and there's Commissioner Merriweather at his beach villa.
Let's make it quick. I got a campfire tonight.
So Michael, no, the AET, the only thing is we might have to come back to the commission with a folder stuffer. We've been through our process of putting out about 8,000 invoices a week. Our machine is sort of getting old fast, so we may have to get a replacement here. But I'll bring that up. There's plenty of time. We can bring that up in August.
And those are not inexpensive, are they?
No.
Well, if the numbers are right, Genevieve and Fred, the 22,000 breeze by accounts and over 90,000 vehicles and transponders. there's a tremendous boost or increase because of the recent closure.
Right.
And we're dealing with 3 traffic accidents that happened within a few days, but working through those. So that's my report, unless there's questions.
Any questions for Michael? Okay, we got the commissioner committee reports. Does any commissioner have an item they'd like to bring up?
It's not really a committee report, but I just wanted to give feedback that Ben and I attended the last Rotary meeting on Thursday to just kind of give a check-in. It was real informal Q&A style. I think it went really well. I got a lot of really positive feedback. We did get one person that had a request of maybe looking at a reduced price if some people wanted to buy the season passes now that the summer is kind of halfway over, if that was a possibility, especially if we're thinking of maybe closing the event site lot to just pass holders only. So I just said I'd bring that up. I have no idea if that's even a conversation we want to entertain or not, but I said I'd pass it along. But otherwise it went well, and I think Rotary is going to try and have us in a casual environment more on a regular basis, because they're obviously concerned with economic development, and that's what we help to provide. So Ben, add anything you want on that.
No, I thought it was very high level discussion. It was obviously, we didn't talk about policy at all, but it was nice to just basically members were just interested in our opinions as elected officials on how things are going and what we see and what's going on. So I thought it was high level, but it was a really nice discussion.
All right. Yeah, well, thanks for attending. Yeah. And I'm assuming we're done then with that, and we could go to action items. A is ratify the change order number 1 with Tappening.
Okay, so I did receive the signed version from the FAA early today. So that change order has been executed. And this is for the North Apron. As you remember, there's 2 projects going on up there. Tappanee Inc. is doing both of them, and they're going really well. They've been a great partner to work with. This change order essentially was created to deal with the subgrade. We foresaw that we would have problems with that on this project because we did on the South Taxiway project as well, and so we put quite a bit of money into the line items that would address subgrade stabilization. However, the way in which we had to move forward with this is somewhat expensive, and for efficiencies, we determined that it would be a good idea to apply this same strategy to the rest of the project. So instead of having to go to each different work area and go through a long process and get to the same point where the subgrade isn't good, we decided just to follow the same strategy throughout, take it all out, and use something called CTS, which is basically concrete mixed with the soils. And so you get a really nice solid base that you can pave on. So this is a ratification. We had to move pretty quick on this, and the order of magnitude is under $40,000, which for a project this size is pretty small. And so this is a ratification, and the way this is paid for with the FAA is that at the end of the project, they basically reconcile all the change orders, and those are included as part of the grant amount. So just like any other federal monies, they find the money through various pools that they have access to, and this is now part of the grant amount and will be reconciled with the grant amount at the end of the project. So any questions on that? If not,
So
I also just want to to say that the team was, worked really well on this. Contractors, subs, and engineers, just really great teamwork on this project to date.
So is this, Ann, is this FAA funds or is this port funds? I get
This is
them.
FAA funds. So this is part of the grant. If you remember, this grant covers this project 100%. That includes change orders.
Okay,
So
and this is what you emailed earlier in the week, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Perfect, thank you.
Yes. But the stipulation that the FAA always puts on change orders or any money they say, they always state that this is subject to availability of funds, and they state that for any of their grants. So they have to do that for, you know, some very tiny possibility of grant funding not being available.
Is that true for the 2 million as well?
Yes. It's true in all of the grants.
Okay, can I get a motion?
I motion to ratify change order number 1 with Topany Inc. in the amount of $37,598,019 for a total project amount of $2,235,406.19.
I'll second.
Okay. Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Chair's aye, it passes. Yeah. And on to number B is to approve the contract with Competitive Commercial Roofing.
So this is the big 7 re-roof that we have gone out to bid now 2 years in a row. The reason this has been such a complex project is that the condition of the beams, it's a solid wood deck with 2x6s on end. And so it took us a while to try and figure out how we would put parameters on that if there was potential rot in some of that wood decking. So we worked with Steve Hawk of Kaufman Engineers, and he did a great job of bookending the possibilities of potential rot, and then also helped us with the seismic upgrade question. And we found out that really only one of the 4 walls needs seismic updates. And so what happened with this bid is we went out to bid without the seismic updates, thinking that those would be something that we would work with a third-party contractor on. But as the bid was out, we decided that it would be better just to include that. So after the walkthrough, that seismic upgrade component was included. We had 4 contractors attend the walkthrough. We got 1 bid from a contractor who's a local contractor here but works all over the Pacific Northwest. It's a good bid, and the bid amount was $211,497. We're asking for 2 things tonight. If you look at the bid sheet, there's a number of bid alternates, and there's repair alternates, and those are just bid at a per square foot price, not or a unit price, not at a total price. The reason being is, like I said, we don't know how much, if any, repairs are going to be needed on that wood decking. So basically, the contractor just gave us a unit price, so when they get in there and they find something that needs to be repaired, there's already a price attached to that item. So what we did is we're asking for approval of the contract amount, and then we're also asking for approval of a spending authority, which makes up about another 20% of the project. This is a pretty good chunk of the roof would have to be bad for us to use up that much spending authority, but we wanted to put 20% in there just in case. So that way we don't have to come back to you. We've already got a unit cost. And then the budget for this project was $300,000 for this year, so we still have plenty of a contingency in case they open up the roof and they get in there and 50% of it is rotted or something. We don't anticipate that. 20% we're thinking is a pretty good number. So looking for 2 action items: approve the contract and then authorize the additional spending authority up to $253,000.
Okay. Can I get a motion?
Would this be 2 different motions or would one suffice?
I think 2.
Okay. And I will move to approve the contract with Competitive Commercial Roofing Incorporated, the amount of $211,497 for re-roofing the Big 7 building barring protest.
I second.
It's moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair's aye, it passes.
And I'll also move to authorize the executive director to approve contingency spending up to a total cost of $253,000.
I'll second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Do we have any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And
Any
Ogo
opposed?
Pogo votes aye too.
Good.
Chair's aye, it passes. Thank you. Then we got approved IGA with Hood River County.
So I don't need to speak too much to this. I just wanted to make sure this is on the regular agenda so the commission can see it. This is very similar, if not nearly identical to the to the IGA that the commission entered last year. This is a contribution that we would make in concert with other agencies, economic development partners, to support the work of the Hood River Energy Council. There's a couple of memoranda here that are attached that describe more about the contributions from others and about the work of the Energy Council. And I note that Commissioner Merriweather is our representative on it. This is in our budget at this amount, $10,000, and staff would recommend approval for it.
Any discussion?
Just one thing I would point out, unless things have changed, I believe the Port of Cascade Locks contributes $5,000, not $1,000, to the Energy Council. But this is something that obviously this is about the 3rd year, I guess, or 2nd year we've done this. I think it would send a poorly received message if we did not do this. The other public partners are engaged in it. I know that Hood River County was wondering about whether or not they would be able to participate this year, but with the passage of their measure in May, then I fully anticipate that they'll participate again. So I think the Energy Council can serve a lot of positive purposes. I would not want us to be the entity that bails on it, frankly. And also, I don't think we can send Chair Everett home with a did not pass response to his wife, Kathy, who happens to be the chair of the Energy Council. So
Yeah,
I would
that'd
like
be a very unpopular message.
Yeah, I bet it would. And does an excellent job in that capacity as well, I might add.
So I have a question on that, because I looked at some of the projects that it has done for the port. It sounds like the port really hasn't received a financial benefit to this point from them. And then I also saw that they did participate in some private development things like the Adams Creek co-housing. And so I guess my only concern is, if these are funds that are intended to be used by public agencies, I'm a little concerned that they are going to private developments, is all.
Well, a lot of the players in this area are private companies. Some are not for profit, but most of the entities that engage in this are for profit. That's been a concern of the Energy Council, being able to demonstrate to individual public entities that they have in fact received direct benefit from this. I tend not to look at it that way and think that if we can bring comprehensive improvement enhancement to the community, that an individual entity doesn't necessarily have to see that value. And especially one such as the port with an economic development mission that transcends the business opportunities of the port. So, I think obviously this year's been a difficult one, and especially over this last several months, as it has been for everything. I would expect things to be more beneficial and to improve down the road from what has been delivered so far, not only for the port, but for others. But I think it's premature to walk away from it. And I think if the port did, that would send quite a message to the city and the county in particular, and also the port of Cascade Lock. That's why I feel like it's important we stay with it.
If we did approve this, would it be, is there any way to add an addendum that we hope that it would be used a little more towards what we think it should be used for moving forward, that we still support it?
Sure. And I think it'd be a good message to send that we expect to see some positive things. The Energy Council was working closely with the port in particular on the community solar project, and unfortunately sort of got boxed in on all sides at the airport to be able to carry that forward, especially with regard to electric fleet potential and other things. I think there's some still potential there, and I got along those lines just fine.
Would it make sense for us to be more in alignment with the Port of Cascade Locks as far as our contribution amount? Or do you feel that it's important for us to be more in alignment with the city? I just know that, with our tax base being so low, we're just in a different position than the city or the county for excess funds.
Mm-hmm. No, I think the 10,000 is for us. I do.
No, could I add that I was not aware they were working on it. So one of the suggestions I would have for the Energy Council is to just increase the communication. But I was not aware that the staff there had worked on a really extensive evaluation of the solar potential of the Jensen building. There was focus on the airport, and then they've shifted to the Jensen building. They retained a consultant that was an expert, a very impressive one, and they did a full-on financial and diagrammetric and output analysis of the Jensen building. So when I saw that, I was very impressed with the product, and it was very specific to and beneficial to the port. It turned out that there wasn't a feasible project, just barely, but it was very good.
Actually,
and not alone that, because I was aware that was being done, but I didn't report it.
Yeah. And even though my wife is on the council, that doesn't, I support what they're trying to do. I shouldn't say trying to do. I support what they're actually doing. They did good work at the airport. That project didn't work out, nor did Jensen building, but they are actively looking for opportunities that will, and they're at the technological edge. So, success after success really shouldn't be expected. And
one question I had is, what did they communicate with the port prior to doing this? Like, did the commission vote to do the studies at the airport? And it seems like they were, kind of utilizing our funds to do studies on our stuff that we didn't really know about. That's, I guess, the communication's a little concerning to me.
But most of the communication was with staff. It was.
Yep, and we were involved, Christy.
I'd say particularly with the airport, it came up in a couple of meetings that they were there, and some of the first we thought it was really a high potential idea that would be real profitable, but as it turns out, they hit a couple of roadblocks that made it unfeasible, but that got discussed at the commission level.
I believe there was some mentions of the Jensen building as well.
Okay, thank you.
So is there further discussion?
Yeah.
And can I?
Yeah, on the other hand, if we don't approve this, then I get off a committee meeting a month, so that's pretty cool.
Not a reason.
Like I said, I'm fine with it for one more year, but I want to see some results a little more in line with what, not co-housing. I don't think co-housing is a great use of our funds or what we should be doing. So I'd like to see some results more in line with what we're doing.
Okay. And can I get a motion?
I'll move we approve the governmental agreement with the Mid-Columbia Economic Development District for Hood River County Energy Plan Implementation Services not to exceed $10,000.
I'll second it.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? In case, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
All opposed? Chair's aye, passes. Then moving item H from the consent agenda to action items as the approved addendum number 1 to lease with Hood River Distillers.
And we should just
Yeah,
know,
so there was a few changes. You received that in email today, I believe. These aren't substantive changes, just verbiage that clarify the terms and what's happening with the lease. So that was Jerry's input. Otherwise, the intent and the terms are the same. Oh, and the commissioner had asked me to go back and make sure that the liability language was clear in this regarding the roof. So there's an excerpt from the lease in the memo that clarifies that. We also talked with Scott Rainier, our insurance agent, and he agreed that this was sufficient.
Okay. Does anybody want to discuss it? Then a motion, please.
I move to approve addendum number 1 with Hood River Distillers Inc. in the Maritime Building.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Where's those?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair's aye, passes. And I think it's the same thing on item I, moving down to the action item. Utility easement.
Sorry. So this is an easement that's required for a water vault and meter at the Halyard building. This is a large vault which currently will house a 3-inch meter, but that can be sized in the future to support a 4-inch meter. So typically you would put this type of unit within the easement running along the right-of-way, and you can see it in Exhibit B of this easement. There's a easement running north-south. There's a 16-foot. The size of this vault just wouldn't be able to fit there. So I worked with Freem and the city and Freem's engineers. We all figured out this location as the best location for this vault and meter, and it requires a 20-foot utility easement, again, because of its size. So Jerry did have some input on the easement document. And the city got back to me today, accepting the majority of that language, but we're still finalizing it. Freem cannot move forward with this portion of the work until the easement is in place. As we're not having a meeting until August 11th, that would drastically delay their project. So what I'm asking for tonight, if you and Jerry are okay with it, is to approve the easement subject to final legal counsel review. And I think we're down to 2 words that we're concerned about. So we're very close.
So if I could add, this is probably a standard form easement for the city. It's standard language. They don't change it much. So Jerry's made some suggestions, and Jerry, you can characterize them, but the city attorney accepted a couple of them. There's not a lot of leverage here. But I wanted to make sure the commission knew this, saw it, and could ask questions about it, because this is a perpetual easement. It's not insignificant in terms of size. And the way it's written, it describes, this is for public purpose. And they mention the underground pipelines, vaults, manholes, power lines, telemetry poles, other poles, and other appurtenances. So it's extensive, it's perpetual, and it grants to the city what appears to be a fairly broad array of uses that would be allowed there. And it's forever. So I wish this could be written to be more specific to underground utilities or underground water structures or something. But it's unlikely the city will change much about it. So with the addition, the clause that says subject to legal counsel review would allow staff and Jerry to at least have a further discussion with this, about this, and maybe make some changes that might limit the definition of public purposes or better define the liability. But it's unlikely that they will change much. So I don't think, we don't want to hold up construction, but we've run into these kind of perpetual grants before that years later have caused some challenges. So we want to do our best on this one.
They're the utility, right?
They are.
We signed the deal or we don't get the utility.
That's pretty much what it amounts to, yeah.
That's unfortunate, but the harsh reality.
Yeah.
Is this meter going to be only, is it specific to Freem? I'm not sure how it works. I know how electricity works as far as their boxes. How does water meter work? Is this just going to serve Freem in the future, or is this a meter that can be tied into to serve a future development by the city as well? I have a question after that too, once somebody answers that one.
Yeah, this would specifically service Freem. So each building has a specific service with a line size that meets the capacity needs of that tenant. So this would specifically serve Freem, and yeah.
And can you show me a picture, whoever's doing this, refresh my memory, the picture of specifically where easement runs, please?
That would just be Exhibit B, Genevieve.
So am I seeing the entirety of 8th Street becomes a public utility easement from Portway Avenue all the way to Riverside Drive?
No, if you look on, so you see Portway and 8th Street. If you look into the site, you'll see a couple things. One, you'll see the title Public Utility Easement, and the number 16 and 2 little arrows, that's showing you the width of the current existing public utility easement. The public utility 20-foot easement, which you'll see just below that 16-foot, and then the arrows point up to 2 dashed lines that basically form a rectangle. That rectangle covers a box that is not shaded. That is the water vault.
Got it. All right. So it's a 4-foot extension of an existing utility easement?
No, it's a brand new easement. The 16-footer runs north to south. This one runs east to west.
So I'm still not seeing it then. Oh, okay, so it's the short 2 dash arrows going east to west. Okay, I see it. I'm sorry. I got it.
No, that's
I got it.
okay. It's a hard drawing to read.
And
Okay,
what is
no, that's what I need to know. Thank you.
what is currently, like, what is on top of that? Is that just parking spots on top of it, or?
Yes, it's currently parking area.
And is there any mention of the surface? Like, could the city commandeer the ground surface, or is it just the underground?
Could they commandeer it? I guess I don't know what you mean. They have the right to access their utility within.
Right, but they couldn't then come back and say, these are our parking spots.
No, because that isn't the purpose of the easement.
Okay,
the purpose
perfect.
is construction, operation, inspection, maintenance, repair, and reconstruction of the facilities in existence on the site. Within that.
Which makes them responsible for all repair if they need to access, and the port is not liable. Is that correct?
For the actual meter and water service, yes, that's correct.
I'm talking about 5 years from now, if they need to access it and do something for any reason, who is responsible for the costs associated with that?
For the cost of the access, that would be the city.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yep,
Gary,
so this is essentially their equipment and their utility that they essentially own and install and maintain, and have to do so because they're responsible for the quality of the water supply in Hood River.
So Jerry, could you weigh in on the public purpose language in this?
Well, yeah, the public purpose language that can mean almost anything that the city wants it to mean. And it can be over the ground, it can be under the ground, and so forth. But, you know, based on this discussion about the parking lot and future access to the area by the city and whose responsibility it is or will be to, if there's going to be pavement removed, who will remove it and who will restore it now and in the future? I think that that's another area that should be clarified.
I would say, I think that's paragraph 3 in there, I think covers that fairly well.
Okay.
They have to restore it with a reasonable time after completion of their maintenance work.
Okay. Yeah,
So-
it is in paragraph 3.
I wish there wasn't so many. So public purpose can mean anything. And if you fast forward 30 years, the city retains a right to do whatever they want to define public purpose as. Again, I don't think we can work our way out of this too far, but it might be worth another discussion with the city to see if they can further clarify this and its specific purpose for water facilities.
I mean, no matter what, there's going to be an easement there, or they're not going to do it. That's just the way it works. But until Jerry says okay, and until we know exactly who's going to have to do what, I think pending legal approval is kind of a must.
Yeah, I agree.
So on that point, Michael, about paragraph 3, that seems to speak to the current time and replacement, but then it refers you to paragraphs 4 and 5 with regard to what can be placed in the easement area in the future. And I still think it might not be a bad idea to have some language in paragraphs 4 or 5 that make it clear that if there is something like pavement or improvements like that, that would be a city responsibility.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, if I could, I think we're going to end up having to approve this easement. And I'm not wild about the language and how broad it is. At the same time, I think we ought to authorize it or approve it, subject to, you know, whatever negotiations with the city Jerry can work out, and just authorize him to go ahead and make the deal as best he can, and then doesn't have to come back to us in a month or 6 weeks or whatever to approve. I think all the issues are understood, and that negotiation with the city, he'll do the best he can, and authorize him to go ahead and get the deal done.
Yeah, I agree. In that case, we're ready for a motion.
I can make a motion to approve the utility easement with the city of Hood River at the Halyard building, subject to legal counsel approval.
Okay. Yeah, second?
I'll second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair's aye.
I might say that it isn't so much in this instance all legal points and us getting the language we'd like, because there's the time element, and that'll be part of the equation here with the city, is to try to get it done in a timely manner. And if they won't agree to certain things, that we probably will just go along, because, as you say, they're a utility.
No, I couldn't agree more, Jerry. You're not gonna, I mean, if you can get them to bend your Herculean task, don't hang up the project for it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's it for the regular session. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So should I recess regular session? And Genevieve, you can take us off of the live feed.
Yeah, and we need to assemble some guests. Would it be possible to break until 7:30?
Of course. We'll recess the regular session and convene executive session at 7:30.
Thanks.
Okay.